Since the earliest days of powered flight, airmen have theorized about air power and its employment in warfare. Although those airmen lived in different times, in different places, and faced different circumstances, they recognized certain truths about air power that appeared to be generally overarching and timeless. Those truths have survived until today, having been tested and validated in world wars and regional conflicts and through more than 8 decades of experience. Our doctrine describes them as tenets. Based on specific lessons of air, space, and cyberspace operations over history, the tenets are unique to air, space, and cyberspace power. The tenets serve as guides for the employment of air, space, and cyberspace forces. They are centralized control and decentralized execution, flexibility and versatility, synergistic effects, persistence, concentration, priority, and balance. First, we'll examine the master tenet, centralized control and decentralized execution. Although centralized control is the oldest formal tenet of air power, it has not always been obvious. Allied air in Northwest Africa in 1942 was parceled out, with mission priorities established by ground commanders. With a divided force spread across the front, airmen were unable to seize control of air or provide effective support to ground forces. Against the centrally controlled Luftwaffe, the results were dismal. U.S. airmen recognized the applicability of this lesson, and in July 1943, Army Field Manual 100-20 formalized the change in thinking when it stated, quote, "Control of available air power must be centralized and command must be exercised through the Air Force commander," unquote. Centralized control mandates that an airman be in command of air, space, and cyberspace forces. General Carl Spaatz once commented in exasperation that soldiers and sailors spoke solemnly about the years of experience that went into training a surface commander, thus making it impossible for outsiders to understand their calling. Yet they all felt capable of running an air force. Airmen believe that only a single air commander, focused on the strategic and operational aspects of a conflict, can best decide how to employ limited air, space, and cyberspace forces. When air power was later centrally controlled in North Africa, it dramatically improved air power's effectiveness and turned around the previous failures. Despite this hard-learned lesson, centralized control has often been difficult to achieve. For example, the strategic bombing effort against Germany in World War II was a divided effort. In the Vietnam War, at one time or another, there were at least 7 different air wars in progress. Whereas centralized control ensures unity of purpose, harmonizes objectives, and helps establish priorities, decentralized execution allows responsiveness in achieving operational effects. This truth's acceptance as a formal tenet wasn't apparent until America's Vietnam experience. The need for decentralized execution was vividly evident in the Rolling Thunder bombing campaign that started in 1965. President Johnson took personal control of operations, not only selecting targets, but also dictating timing, ordnance loads, sorties, and alternate targets. The result was a bombing campaign that was unresponsive to the operational environment and lacking flexibility, validating the tenet of decentralized execution. Decentralization ensures the inherent flexibility and versatility of air, space, and cyberspace power is maintained in employment. Although often used interchangeably, the two characteristics are distinct in meaning, yet tightly fused in application. Most military forces can be used for a variety of purposes in a variety of locations. Air, space, and cyberspace power, however, with their ability to operate in the third dimension, permit unequaled flexibility to assume new roles and unmatched versatility to be employed against any objective. Flexibility allows air, space, and cyberspace forces to shift from one campaign objective to another quickly. For example, the A-10, usually considered a close air support aircraft, took on many interdiction missions during Desert Storm. In another example, B-52s switched from their strategic bombing role to deliver devastating close air support missions during Operation Enduring Freedom. The versatility of air, space, and cyberspace power stems from the fact that it can be employed equally effectively and with unmatched responsiveness in support of strategic, operational, or tactical objectives. During Operation Allied Force, for example, the Rapid Retargeting Cell and the Combined Air Operations Center used various intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance sources for detecting and developing targets and in providing information in near real time to allow aircraft and missiles to attack those targets. Flex targeting, as it was called, allowed the rapid redirection of aerial attack assets against tactical, operational, or strategic targets across the theater. Because air, space, and cyberspace forces bring remarkable flexibility and versatility to the campaign, these forces can produce synergistic effects. The tenet of synergistic effects maintains that integrated operations will have a greater total effect than the sum of the individual effects achieved by each function. Synergies between component forces form the essence of joint warfare. When integrated air, space, and cyberspace forces are combined with friendly surface maneuver forces, the adversary can face a crippling dilemma. The simultaneous ground-air war of Operation Iraqi Freedom presents an excellent example of the synergistic effects developed between our ground, air, space, and cyberspace forces. Whether interdiction or close air support, navigation or weather services, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or command and control information, the synergistic effects created between air, space, and surface forces overwhelmed the enemy and severely limited his ability to respond. Those synergistic effects were enhanced by the ability of air, space, and cyberspace forces to conduct operations continuously against a broad spectrum of targets. Continuous operations, or persistence, can produce a cumulative effect on the opponent's ability to conduct operations. The stresses imposed by persistent attacks and the lack of logistics and command guidance can produce a devastating physical and psychological effect on the battlefield. In the Pacific Theater during World War II, General George Kenney attributed his ability to gain control of the air and undertake other combat missions to the fact that Allied air forces in the southwestern Pacific made more persistent attacks than did the Japanese. Persistent attacks of Japanese air bases was a primary factor in gradually extending air control from the eastern tip of New Guinea to eventually neutralizing the Japanese base at Rabaul. Persistence as applied to air, space, and cyberspace power, however, also includes a unique characteristic that may not be readily apparent. Unlike surface forces, air power does not have to occupy enemy territory to bring force to bear. Operations in the third dimension allow air forces to visit and revisit locations without remaining within close proximity to the location itself. Air, space, and cyberspace forces are uniquely suited to delivering persistent lethal and non-lethal force. The non-lethal nature of persistence is evident in space systems that continuously provide critical functions to joint forces. Both lethal and non-lethal persistence was demonstrated in enforcing the Iraqi no-fly zones throughout the 1990s. Persistence allows for airspace and cyberspace occupation without the need for territorial occupation. One of the most constant elements of strategy throughout military history has been the effort to focus overwhelming power at the decisive time and place. Whether it was Napoleon's maneuvers, blitzkrieg tactics, or thousand bomber raids, the purpose has always been the same: to concentrate force to achieve operational objectives. Rather than concentration in numbers, however, air, space, and cyberspace power is best concentrated when it is focused in purpose and effect. The dramatic video images of Operation Desert Storm and the lethal precision of strikes during Operation Iraqi Freedom made it clear that it no longer takes hundreds of bomber aircraft dropping thousands of bombs to affect a single target. Today, one aircraft employing precision munitions can produce effects that were only previously possible through massed formations. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, 3 out of 5 bombs were precision guided, allowing fewer but more effective forces. We can now view the venerable tenet of concentration from a different perspective, that of effects rather than numbers. Precision-guided munitions make it possible to achieve the desired effects with a minimum of weapon platforms. Because air, space, and cyberspace forces bring a unique set of characteristics and capabilities to any military campaign, they are very much in demand. Consequently, appropriate priorities must be established to ensure available air, space, and cyberspace forces are employed most effectively. Since airspace and cyberspace power, both lethal and non-lethal, can be directed against almost anything, demands and requests usually surpass available assets. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Air Force airlift fleet, for example, not only faced the demands of a full-blown war, but also had to meet ongoing lift requirements of other regional commanders, support peacekeeping operations in Bosnia and Kosovo, back Operation Noble Eagle homeland defense missions, and help reinforce South Korea. Selecting objectives for air, space, and cyberspace power is the essence of an effective strategy. Because these are the only military forces that can access practically any location on the Earth, their employment must be prioritized toward creating effects that have the greatest influence in achieving objectives. Although setting priorities is perhaps self-evident, the process is not absolute. Political directives limiting targets, similar to what occurred during the bombing of North Vietnam or battles where unexpected resistance places the lives of U.S. troops in grave danger, such as the Siege of Khe Sanh, are 2 examples of events that could dictate changes in planned priorities.
Target here.
Emerging time-sensitive targets, such as the June 2006 airstrike that eliminated Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, can also change priorities. The fusion of data between sensor and shooter now makes possible rapid priority shifts. Operation Iraqi Freedom saw operational priorities emerge that were then passed to aircraft already airborne. Priorities are critical to focusing effects toward decisive campaign objectives. Balance is the final tenet, and from an airman's point of view, it must cover the entire theater of operations. Airmen cannot view a theater in parts or pieces, in contrast to surface forces that generally divide the overall effort geographically, nor can they view air, space, and cyberspace forces as individual components. Airmen must carefully bring all elements of this power together to produce the desired operational effect. The person best suited to harness all 3 forces is the air commander. Only he can determine the proper theater-wide balance between offensive and defensive operations and among strategic, operational, and tactical applications. And because those assets will be limited and in great demand, the air commander must determine the right mix of forces to accomplish the campaign's objectives. That balance is the responsibility of the air commander. Getting the balance right could be a crucial determinant in the outcome of the combined campaign. The tenets of airspace and cyberspace power employment are interconnected. Flexibility and versatility necessitate priorities. Priorities determine synergistic effects, levels of concentration, and degrees of persistence. The strategic, operational, and tactical objectives of campaigns will dictate operations. Campaigns will differ. Emerging technologies will offer new opportunities, and the way conflicts are fought may change. But the tenets of air, space, and cyberspace power remain valid. The interrelationships between the tenets are dynamic, but the validity and applicability of each have been confirmed over the history of air, space, and cyberspace flight, beginning with the musing of the earliest air power theorist to the integrated application of air, space, and cyberspace power in the most recent times. The tenets of air, space, and cyberspace power serve as fundamental truths, guiding the employment of the unique capabilities of air, space, and cyberspace power.